right, I now have the pleasure of introducing my friend Max Levchin. For those of you who are younger, Max is probably better known as the CEO founder of Affirm. For those of you a little older, Max might be known as the co-founder and CTO of PayPal. In between, he helped incubate and served as the the chairman of Yelp for about a decade. He's also a very prolific and very successful angel investor, so he has a lot of context about all the kinds of things you're struggling with. Max, if you come join us, we'll talk about the roller coaster ride of building a startup. Max has been through many roller coasters, sometimes by day, sometimes by week, sometimes by year, sometimes by company. We'll talk about all of that. Thanks.
Thank you for the nice intro.
So I think you're a professional roller coaster rider at this point.
Fun fact, I get extreme vertigo on real roller coasters, and once broke up with the girl I was dating because she insisted it would do me good to go into a roller coaster. I said, it really won't. And in fact, I might like vomit all over you. And I did. And then I was like, I can't go on like this. And so
you found a synthetic alternative.
Yeah, so lacking this ability in real life, I just enjoy the ride.
Okay, let's start with the macro side of the roller coaster. Since I've met you probably 23 years or 4 years ago, you've had two major successes and one, let's call it failure, mediocre company. What's common about the successful companies, and what was different about the company that didn't work out so well?
I think I've asked myself that question about 1,000 times, and if I knew back then what I know now, I'm not sure I would have done much better. So that's the sad truth, is that a lot of this is due to chance and moments in time. Most things about company running, in my opinion, is about realizing where you have to have very tight coupling and where you have to have very loose coupling. At PayPal, we had very tight coupling around kind of idealistic notions like New World Currency. We must be the New World Currency. What does that mean? Who knows? Who cares? New World Currency, damn it. Like on a shirt, on every wall, that's what we're going to do. And a lot of things were very loose, where we were supposed to be a Palm Pilot. I did not think you'd hear the word Palm Pilot twice in 2 presentations back to back, but there you are. But we built a Palm Pilot product, which was not even about payments, and so we left that right out, and then that was not an important thing. And so knowing what's important, knowing what's not important, knowing where the coupling has to be tight because it's on mission, core to who you are, and what is just not that big of a deal is a skill that you learn over the years. And being able to very quickly say, wait, that's not core at all, jettison that idea. At PayPal, we knew from day zero what we wanted to do in a big way, and the rest was very loose, and we succeeded. At Affirm, I doubled down on the idea that the mission is crucial, the core values are crucial, how we're going to do this is critical, but what we're doing and who with and who for was quite loose, which at the time I think people were concerned that we had too many freely changeable variables, but it obviously worked out okay so far. At Slide, which is the middling company, I was coming back from the roller coaster of PayPal, and younger Max then thought, one of the things that just kept it really, really difficult is this constant change. I had no idea what kind of crazy pivot Peter or David or any one of these characters would propose tomorrow. And what I wanted to do is a little bit more rigor and a little bit more knowing where it is I'm going to be tomorrow. So first half of Slide was all about, we're going over there, and that's what we're going to do. And it really didn't work. And the reaction that I had, which I think is very rational, was like, well, you know what? We actually need to decouple everything. Let's just be as nimble and fluid as possible. And by the time we ultimately sold the company to Google for not a lot of money, it was basically a construction kit of various social media products where we could recombine into anything we wanted because we were so completely willing to pivot left, right, and center. It's a great luck that Google, in the moment, thought it was a valuable thing for them to own. In reality, it was just a toy box where you could build toys, but not much else.
So at Slide, one of the disadvantages of that evolution is, other than didn't get to the sort of promised land, was you had this metaphor about it's like driving a bus with school kids. Talk about the downsides of pivoting too much or evolving too quickly.
Yes, the team is what matters most. In fact, it's probably all that matters. It's another version of what's loosely coupled, what's tightly coupled. At PayPal, we had extreme cast of characters. You were probably one of the most normal people there. I thought
That's actually true.
it's true. And like, if you know Keith, you know that's you have to have a very different bar elsewhere. I was not very normal, but I was just really young, and so a lot of sort of shenanigans that I was a part of were just sort of youthful stupidities and indiscretions. But you had sort of giants of intellect like Peter and lots of other people like that who were just outlier crazy, like a lot of the times, and they would have these outlandish ideas, and yet all of us respected each other deeply. We would hear the crazy idea of the day, be like, all right, you're a total nut job, but I'm going to take you entirely seriously because you're brilliant, and I've seen you be right about things that others just couldn't conceive of, and so we're going to go do this, or at least explore the thing you're proposing to do. When I ran Slide, one of my initial ideas was, the roller coaster was a lot, and part of it was due to the extreme personalities, throwing chairs against the wall, or at least the sort of rhetorical chairs against the wall. That was fun when I was 23, but now that I'm 33, maybe I can just tamp it down a little bit. And it turns out that really brilliant people actually have extreme personalities more often than not. I built the original teams of Slide to have much more of a collegial, friendly, warm, home-like feel, which made for a great place to be when things were going well. But when things were not going well, you would have groupthink, where everybody in the back of the bus would be singing a song, but the bus was moving very quickly. But people felt okay, and then when I would rage about how, hey, why don't you guys get out of the bus and start pushing it with me, people were like, wait a second, that's not what I signed up for. Like, I thought this would be lovely and family-like. And so ultimately, you can rotate your team, and you can bring in sort of harder core people and put up with their insanities, but everything takes time. And so as I started a firm, I sort of went back to this idea, crazy personalities are just fine with me. In fact, I want more of them. But the filtering function is, do I respect the intelligence and the talent so much that even if the personality, by personality, by the way, you can have people who are sort of like, well, that person is insane, but they're brilliant. But the more kind of difficult ones, like, well, they have vastly different views on topics that don't matter to me or for this business. That's how you end up working with people who have just vastly different political views or extremely different lifestyles from yours. And some of it is just difficult because that's not who you are, and you have to respect that about them because you respect their intelligence and their talent. And structuring that, building that is a lot of effort. If you are successful, if you're at least diligent at it, you end up with the team that I have at a firm, which is stunningly good. Like, I think it's, with all due respect, better than the early PayPal team, and that was something else to beat. And a big part of it is just relentless desire to build people that can put up with a roller coaster and will all get out of the bus and push it the second the bus slows down.
So a micro version of a roller coaster is everybody eventually hires the wrong person in the like a leadership level, and that causes this roller coaster ride internally. It's pretty tumultuous. Yeah. How fast do you know? What signals do you look for? And then what do you do once you've realized you made a mistake?
One of my most favorite all-time quotes from a movie is, whenever there's a doubt, there's no doubt. I've repeated that probably from this stage last time I was invited here, so if you heard me say this before, sorry. It's a line from Robert De Niro in a movie called Ronin, which is a fantastic homage to another movie called The French Connection. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you're not as old as I am. But those are movies worth watching, but the line definitely worth heeding. When you're staring at a peer, or if you're the CEO at a direct report, and you catch yourself thinking, I wonder if you're here next year, this person shouldn't be here today. But unfortunately, it's that binary. It's very, very rare. It's very safe, by the way, and totally not scary to have a moment where you say, I wonder if I can just stop myself from punching you in the face. Like, that is a much better emotion than I wonder if you're still here next year. I can't stand the shit that you're spouting at me, you're so ridiculous, you're obnoxious, all the sort of like, oh, I rage against you, is like super okay. Brilliant people cause that sort of emotional response. Boring people, untalented people, not hardworking people, people that don't have the company's best interest in mind, people that are undermining each other, those people make you think, oh, I should have fired you yesterday, but, and the but is a long list of why not today, but you typically know. No one's ever said, I wish I had fired that person later. Like, that is just not a thing you hear. You definitely hear, I wish I had fired that person sooner. That's a much more common response. And so, when there's a doubt, there is no doubt. That's also applicable just about every other situation in life, but in people, it's infinitely applicable.
So when you're Well, once you made the decision, are there better or worse ways to handle this, or?
This is a line I taught Jeremy Stoppelman at the very first time he had to fire someone. So Jeremy Stoppelman reported to me at PayPal. He was my VP of engineering, which was very weird because he was my schoolmate and classmate at the University of Illinois. And so literally I managed a guy for 4 years of extreme roller coasters of PayPal who was my age, my education, same major, same everything, same school. And so it was always like a weird, like, why are you in charge? I could be in charge. And
Especially with Jeremy.
you know, we're friends, but at the time it was a little tense. At Yelp, I was chairman of the board and very deliberately ceded control to him, except there was one moment, or not except, there was one moment in time where he said, look, I have this guy and I need to fire him, and he's very senior, and it's not like, hey, you're a terrible engineer, get out. And I was like, there's a trick. The trick is, if it's someone you thought you respected, it's not because you were sometimes you're bamboozled, and then the right thing to do would be like, hey, get out. Like, you're obviously a liar and a fraud. Like, get the hell out of here. Those are not difficult conversations. Somebody does something terrible, someone lies, someone is caught cheating you or the company, that firing motion will come very naturally. It'll not be pleasant, but you'll feel good right after, like, you know, open up the boil and lance it and move on. The conversations that are really difficult is where you like the person, when you actually respect them, you're still wondering, like, what is it that I didn't see? What am I seeing now? Is this the right call? The courtesy and the line is, I'm going to ask you to resign. Offer the opportunity to say, I am going to self-eject. This was a mistake. Maybe I made it. Maybe you made it. It doesn't matter. Like, the right kind thing to do for the company and the team is for you to resign, for me to accept the resignation. I'll say the nicest things. When someone asks for a reference, I will tell them who you are and what I thought you were when I hired you. And I'll say that you left because you resigned because it was the right thing for both of us to do. There will be not a trace of, I'm going to shoot you in the head now. I am going to hand you the gun. If the person says, absolutely not, you know, you default back to the first part where, like, okay, this person actually is trying to hang on and they don't get the clue, and like that's the moment when you know it's the part where you're no longer going to regret the firing. But if they don't have the self-respect or the respect towards you to accept the weapon of for the harakiri, you know, you should re-examine your hiring policies.
So on the current team you have, which is stellar, presumably some of the time some of the executives disagree with you. How do you decide when to listen to them and, you know, when to stay with your views?
Yep. So Keith is on my board, so he knows the executive team quite intimately. And I will describe the characters in a very short manner, but kind of some of the important pieces on this particular chessboard are Libor, who is our president, but initially was our CTO. So he's very technical, same university, same major as I was at University of Illinois, computer science. And then this guy, Michael, who's our CFO. Michael is a hothead. Libor sometimes is known as Libot because he's so deliberate and robotic and thoughtful. And I'm me. And Michael has a line that he swears by, and I have now decided I agree with him. A firm performs the best when Max and Libor disagree. So we are cut from the same cloth. He came from Czechoslovakia when he was a teenager. I came from Ukraine when I was a teenager. Same Chicago childhood, same public high schools, same university, same degree. We've worked together at Slide and other companies. So we could be twins in many ways. When we disagree, that means that something worth disagreeing is happening. So long as you position the debate with your executive team as it's a free-for-all, until I decide. And one of the things that I sort of take into repeating very often to our executive meetings is, hey, it's a democracy, and then I decide. And so long as people understand that their voice is welcome, they must speak up. They have they will not offend me or each other, should not offend each other one bit. If it's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, I want to hear that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard at least twice in every meeting. Like, if we're not hearing that, the person who's not saying this, probably wasting space in that meeting. You want more disagreement. You also want to know exactly who's in charge at the end, who's going to make the final call. If you abuse all of you are disagreeing with me, but I'm going to make a decision, you will lose credibility. So you better be right enough times where people say, you know what, the last time we all voted against and this crazy Max guy still said, nope, we're going to go the other way, it kind of worked out. that actually is also a danger, because if you're lucky or good, you start teaching people that they can all speak, but ultimately going to make a call. It won't always be in agreement with what everybody else is saying. And even if everybody's saying left and you're saying right, it's always going to go your way. So it's important you manage your own expectations about how often you get to override people. And of course, the ultimate goal is to be right for the business versus any sort of a social dynamics. And so all of it has to go into the mix. But generally speaking, demanding that people speak up, demanding that people disagree, demanding that people say, hey, like, this is not right, like, you're totally full of shit, Max, is like, if you have that sort of a free expression dynamic in all your executive meetings, people actually don't get upset if you say, all right, I've heard everybody, now we're gonna go this way, because the expectation is that someone has to put their hand down and be like, okay, now we're done debating. If you have a sort of a quiet room where you extemporize and like, well, what are we gonna do, Max? We're gonna go to the left. Okay, then. You're teaching your team that their opinions don't actually matter very much. And so asking for more disagreeable input is the best way you can deal with people that disagree with you. If they disagree with you past the point of decision, it's important, ideally in public, if the team is that good. If people are not yet comfortable with each other, private probably is better to say like, hey, I have made a decision. We are gonna go to the right, not to the left like you wanted. But I just want to remind you, you're deeply respected. I won your disagreement next time, and you will have full rights to tell me how wrong I was when it turns out that that leads to the monster and the pot of gold is on the other side. Like, you will have all the benefits of being right if I'm wrong. But for now, I've made a call, and we're gonna go that way. The thing that's really good is I don't think I've ever gotten feedback, hey, you were too decisive and you were wrong. The feedback that I get and the feedback that every CEO has gotten at some point or another is you were too indecisive. Like, we were looking at left door and right door and you couldn't make up your damn mind. And then someone pushed us from behind and we fell into the right door, and we're only here because it happened to us. We didn't choose to do it. Or we fell into the wrong door and now, oh boy, you should have made a decision. Because if you didn't make a decision, you go through the wrong door and then you end up eating the consequences. Then your whole team's like, not only are you wrong, you're indecisive. No one remembers that you didn't make a decision. They all remember that you were pushed into the decision, but you probably would have gone there anyway. And so it's quite dangerous not to decide, and it's quite dangerous to allow for sort of festering of, well, what is he gonna say anyway?
At what frequency do you sort of sample, whether, let's say, a micro decision or like the business as a whole? And it's like a little, because the danger, like sort of like cooking is, chefs say, like if you, constantly put the thermometer in the dish, you're going to ruin the dish. So how do you know what the right frequency to like, kind of revisit this stuff?
You sort of have to be aware of it at all times, it feels like. I don't really ask myself deliberately, like, hey, how am I doing in my... I obsess over, am I decisive, because I happen to know that if given the time, I will just deliberate some more. Like, there's perception that time is infinite and you can just think a little bit harder is an affliction for anybody who likes thinking, and most people who run companies enjoy thinking strategically. And so I tend to ask myself, once I say, hey, here's a decision, did I take too long? One of the things that I really enjoy doing is like entirely performative, self-training manner is these burn down meetings. We're like, hey, we're gonna bring like 10 decisions in front of the entire executive team and we're not leaving until we've decided. And like, right or wrong, we're gonna make some decisions right now. And you typically bring in 10 things and you decide on 8 and 2 are lingering. But people who were like, I wonder if we're gonna make all these decisions, like, oh my God, I made 8 decisions, like killed some projects, decided to like completely stop pursuing some big deal. Oh, we're so decisive. And so you just train yourself and your team to expect, we can absolutely make 10 big decisions or 8 big decisions in a half an hour. So it's better to just train by practice, in my opinion, than ruminate on were we good enough or not. And that's
basically there's a subconscious downside to delaying and try to make it more transparent. I mean, try to bring it more consciously.
Yeah, best lesson I've ever learned from David Sachs was defaults are the most powerful thing in the world. And you can apply that to anything in life. It's definitely true in product design. You can drop down that allows you to pick the cheapest funding source for PayPal is the way you're going to pay your, bought something on PayPal this morning and paid with my bank account as the backing source. I'm like, David Sachs, I hate you. Like, it's better to pay with your credit card. You're better protected. But at some point or another, there was some campaign that made me switch my preferences. I'm not changing my defaults ever again. So defaults in decisiveness, defaults in business is the same thing. Like, if you just train yourself, like by default, we're not leaving this room until we've made a decision and we got 25 minutes. kind of make a decision. Not all the time, but if you do it enough times, you'll be like, well, I'm leaving a room and I didn't make any decisions. Like, this is a waste of a meeting. Like, whom did I invite that delayed me from making decisions is another really important thing that like one thing that's actually really, really valuable to benchmark, by the way. I used to do two things, sort of stopped doing lately, so maybe I should restart. But I would go back a month and ask myself, what kind of meetings did I have? And which ones were good and which ones were bad. And good is basically did I make a decision that routed the company, and bad are the ones that didn't make any decisions. Maybe I learned something, but like nothing, there was no forward motion, just retroactive motion. And if I were 50% more on the former than the latter, I was happy, and it was the other way around, I was very upset. And then within that, you can ask the question, all right, so what are the attendee lists? And if some of the attendees where you didn't make any decisions and you're angry about those meetings, like is there a thread that connects these people? Is there a person who's stopping your decisiveness? That's I'm going to ask you to resign. We start by like uninviting them to meetings. It's actually, that's how you find out your next reorg. So if in your executive group, inevitably you will bring, like, well, I have to invite that person because like, shit, he reports to me directly. So like, it's going to be really weird if like I have 6 direct reports, I'm going to invite 5. This one is not, don't need, like, okay. Yeah, maybe it doesn't need to be reporting to me directly. If like I'm constantly telling myself, don't need to invite this person to these kind of decision-driven meetings. And when I do, decisions don't happen. So those are telltale signs on when you're not efficient with decisions.
One other question that a lot of people are interested in, this is a pretty deeply technical audience, or we tend to back, obviously, technical innovation. How do you build an organization that scales, that's technology first or engineering first? What do you do differently than like a standard CEO would do?
I think there's many different ways of accomplishing it, for sure. You need to make, well, a couple things. So at least initially, if you're not the CTO, if you're very technical as a CEO, that helps because you can hang with the people and have real conversations. If your CTO is very technical or your head of engineering, that helps because people join hardcore engineers who are hardcore engineers. The challenge typically comes along 2 years in, 3 years in, when the early, very, very hard technical problems have been solved. And then you're like, hey, you should come here. You're a 10x engineer. And like, yeah, but you already built your thing. Now I'm just like polishing the knobs in the thing. And I don't want to polish knobs. I want to build a new thing. So the things that we did at a firm, which was at the time was very controversial. At this point, I've heard other people quote me back to me. But Lieber and I decided that we're going to, so the core, like a firm lends money, lending money eventually requires you own or rent a ledger. These days you can actually rent a really good ledger. Back then you could not get a good ledger, so we built our own. Ledger is like what they call core banking, is just a really, really featureful set of objects that know how to do basic double entry accounting. It's a pain in the ass to build. Like the second you start looking at it technically, you're like, oh, you don't want to store floating point numbers because precision, but currencies, so how do you convert? So there's like a sprawl of complicated technical things, which if you're into financial services, fascinating stuff. If you're not, like, why would I want to spend my best years doing this? But I'm into financial services, so I actually really, really love those kind of puzzles. Once you solve them, you're like, I'm so cool. I built my own core processor, my own ledger. But then the next guy who's just like me, who's really into financial services, is the guy I want to hire. So how do you get them in? Like, by the way, we built our ledger. So Lieber and I decided in year 2 that we will rewrite our ledger from scratch every year, which is an enormous effort. And it's sort of a nutty thing to do. And eventually you start rewriting modules. You don't rewrite the whole thing.
So that's why we have 754 engineers.
But they're really, really good.
That's true too.
Because at some point they joined, a huge percentage of them are now in Poland, which makes it a little bit more palatable financially. But you can get some really good Polish engineers, and the ones that really love rewriting ledgers are still joining us. But the point is, if you expect to hire people that delight in solving the hardest kind of problem in your industry, you have to be prepared to give them those problems. And you can't manufacture them by saying, you know what, we're going to have, like the way Google solved it. Like if you ever worked at Google, which I did for a year after Slide, if you go into a Google bathroom, you'll find these like really cool logic puzzles. And that's how they get their 10x engineers to stick around. Because yes, you're literally polishing a knob on the search and advertising giant money manufacturing machine in a backyard, but you got to keep your brain occupied somehow. So here's a cool puzzle. Solve this while urinating. And if you are Google, you can in fact afford to do this. If you are a firm, you just tell them like, okay, the hardest thing we've ever done, we're going to do it again every year. And you can do maybe a little bit better than that, but that's not a bad way of attracting and maintaining talent like that.
Great. So we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. I'm sure there's some. Feel free to raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone to you.
Or scream.
There's one over there, sorry.
Hey, this is Anshu. I read your blog post about the Shamir secret thing. Can you just tell that story again to everybody, because I just love it.
We have 16 seconds. That will not work in 16 seconds. All right. If the technical audience, you should be able to get it. So the sacredest thing at PayPal, certainly during my time there, was the database of credit cards and bank account credentials that was, at the time, roughly 100 million rows of what now is known as PII. The acronym wasn't made there yet, but people's financial data. Very, very, very scary to lose it. We encrypted everything. I could talk to you for an hour about how secure we were. It was my obsession, my background. Before all the current dark times began, I was in computer security. So it was all very well encrypted. The one big vulnerability, we had a master key that would decrypt the entire database, and that just bugged the shit out of me. So one day, I read this paper, strongly recommended, called Sharing Secrets Among Friends. It's actually a description of a paper written by Adi Shamir in the 50s or 70s, but the sort of nice story is from Bruce Schneier, who's a great popularizer of cryptography. It describes this really cool idea where you take a nth degree polynomial, which can be defined precisely by exactly n points on it. But if you have n minus 1, the possibilities of polynomials are infinite. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a cool little math property. But imagine a line. If you have 1 point, it's a second degree. If you have if you have 1 point, a line can rotate around that point, go anywhere. If you have 2 points, it's a line, it's the only one line. And so if I gave you one of those points and I had the other point, we could recreate the line, and that could be the key. If you had a super fancy n-dimensional thing, I would need to give exactly n points to recreate it. But if it's n minus 1, who knows what it is. So it's a perfect way to share secrets. And so I implemented Shamir secret sharing over undoubtedly 2 or 3 days of no sleep, and very proudly got everybody together to replace the one master key into what's called a sharded key, where each one of the people has a shard. That was really great. We took down the site. We decrypted with a single master key the big PayPal database. We re-encrypted it with the sharded key. We brought the site back up, and people typed in their shards, and it didn't decrypt correctly. For the next 5.5 hours, we were basically beating our heads against the wall because we were so secure. There was not a backup. There was not we'll just fix it later. So Peter would call me at 5 a.m. Hey, why is the site still down? And be like, oh, it's fine. He was on the East Coast, so he was already awake. And we're fine. We'll be okay. And all right, it's now 9 a.m. on the East Coast. The site's still down. Okay, now there's a CNN running a headline saying PayPal went down last night. No, nobody knows when it's going to come back. Total pandemonium. I encourage you to read my blog post on the topic. But the long and short of it is, this will be only funny to some of you. I coded this thing on Solaris, but I ran it on Linux. Get pass, which is the echo-free kernel call that allows you to gather people's input from the keyboard, which turns off echo. So it's a special purpose function it's like scanf, but specifically for no echo and quite secure, so you don't show your password as you're typing it in. On Solaris, can capture up to 256 characters. On Linux, cuts it off after 8 characters. When I was distributing my shards, I told everybody, by the way, when you put in your shard, it better be friggin' long, at least 12 characters, ideally 24. So every single person had a really long friggin' password. And so as we tried to reassemble it, it would take in the 24-character long passwords and reassemble them only the first 8 characters at a time. That would have never worked. It was actually one of the greatest puzzles of my life. At some point, I knew it was not going to work, and I went to my cubicle, which I remember like it was yesterday, and just stared into the black CRT for 30 minutes trying to figure out what could have possibly gone wrong. And the very next thing I did is typed in man get pass, which was the only part of this whole thing that I didn't implement myself, on both the production machine and my desktop where I coded it. And it was 8 to 56. Fuck me. And 10 minutes later, we're back up. that was.
So this was catastrophic enough. I believe you didn't tell Peter the actual story for over a decade.
I basically, I sort of said the entire engineering team who was there with me for like the postmortem, like, all right, this can never leave this room. It's like the biggest embarrassment I'll ever have as a software engineer. So maybe I should give up now. But yeah, so I think for a very long time, this was like a special request story. So first of all, the first 5 years I told no one. And then after that, I was like, this is too good of a educational story to keep it entirely to myself. So on occasion at like YC Startup School or small groups, I would be like, all right, let me tell you the one time where I really fucked it up. And over time, I became less and less embarrassed and more interested in like telling people. Like the story here is obviously like details always matter. Like if you're going to be the kind of CEO that writes code, or at the time it was CTO who writes code, like you better be at least as good at details as the people you trust to write code for you. Like the embarrassing wasn't that I had a bug, is that it took me so damn long to figure out what it was. And because I was the one who coded the thing, there was not enough people in the room who could proofread it for me or pair program with me. But two is how do you behave through a crisis? Like the real lesson was we could have issued a press release. We could have said, all right, everybody go start typing in your passwords. One of our engineers who was in the room literally screamed, we're going to have to start brute forcing this key because it'll only take a few billion years, but no problem. And so you get to watch how people behave in a moment of extreme pressure. And my proudest part of it was that I actually, like I had never faced now this is a company destroying moment. Like up until that point, my companies failed in a slow motion way, like oh, we're out of money or like, nobody wants my product. This was like, we were a year from IPO, we had 100 million credentials. This was like a real thing. We won eBay. Everything was going our way. And I was just about to pull the pin out of the hand grenade and sort of gently put it on our collective desks. And the fact that I sort of like, the only right thing to do here is to actually think like an engineer, put out the fear of total failure, and just try to reason what could have possibly gone wrong, and maybe there's a fix. The interesting postscriptum, which is also in my blog, in the fog of war, I had not known or not realized this, but because I was worried something like this would go down, I actually had a printout, like a physical printout of the master key that I sealed in an envelope and handed to our general counsel, John Mueller, told him, put it into a bank vault somewhere, and if I don't ask about it for 2 days, burn it. And said, what is it? Like, don't look at it, don't open it. This is the most important thing we have at PayPal. If you don't hear from me again about this thing, burn it. But I might come screaming, and then you better be able to get it. And so we fixed the problem. Site went back up by like 11 East Coast time. I never thought of it again until he told me, by the way, that envelope, what was in it? It's like, could have spared myself a lot of headache. But
so there's the roller coaster for you, all in one anecdote. Thanks.